I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're exploring a powerful book. It is called Orpheus in Jerusalem, and it's written by a terrific author by the name of Daniel Stepner. This captivating novel interweaves four narratives, blending fiction and real-life events framed by a gripping kidnapping. Join us as we delve into the life of a professional violinist and discover the profound connections between music and storytelling. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are beneath this interview. Good to see you here today, my friend. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you, Crawford.
My
Logan.
pleasure. Call me Logan, call me Crawford, whatever you
No,
call me. I've been
sorry,
called worse.
my fault.
Sounds
Logan.
good. Daniel, the connection between storytelling and music, I think it's great. For me, kind of a lyrical, kind of a rhythmic influence has always been part of my writing. Do you find the same is true for you?
Yes, I'm a musician professionally, and I'm constantly playing and teaching and so on. And this idea of a rhythm of a rhythm and a tempo is so important, obviously, in good music. And in my writing, which I'm not a professional writer, but I've written a lot of program notes, and I became fascinated with the idea of writing a novel.
Mhm.
And is definitely kind of a rhythm to it when you get into it. And I found myself rearranging things and starting things over again, rewording them, often rearranging chapters and things
Mhm.
like that, which had a lot to do with rhythm and intensity and so on.
Absolutely. It's composing. It's just a different type of a composing, and it's an arrangement. It's just a different type of arrangement for sure. Let's give the folks at home an overview of the story, Orpheus in Jerusalem.
Sure. It's really four narratives, as you've said,
Mhm.
um, and two of them are fictional and two real life retellings of real life events. The two fictional ones consist of something that was originally going to be a straight memoir and wasn't going to be fictional at all. But I got bored with it and I started inventing. And I invented an alter ego, and I certainly elaborated. A lot of it is from my life, and there's some things that really happened in my life which might seem unbelievable,
Mhm.
particularly in my early life, which I think I spent a lot of time at. Um, and the other real life, the other fictional narrative is my take on the Abraham and Isaac story in the Bible,
Mhm.
which has always haunted me from the time I sort of learned it as a student. Um, it was something which bothered me a lot. And I
Mhm.
wanted to invent a backstory for Abraham, which somehow humanized him.
Mhm.
Um, and so a big chunk of the book is his story, imagined,
Mhm.
leading up to the almost sacrifice of his son. And I was inspired up in this by research into the history of ancient Sumeria,
Mhm.
which I did a fair amount of for some time. The city of Ur, which is a real city in southern Iraq, was supposedly where Abraham came from, and it was dug up by archaeologists about 100 years ago. And somewhat before that, just a few years before that, scholars cracked the code of cuneiform. So when they
Mhm.
dug up Ur, they found all these tablets with with stories and lists of things and poetry and uh, business invoices and codes of conduct and so on. So we
Mhm.
know a great deal about that society, and that certainly played into my invention of Abraham's backstory. There's a great deal to be learned from that society, which was very sophisticated in its own way. And then there are the two real life narratives. One is a Holocaust memoir by a man I knew at the end of his life. I knew him quite well, and I was very taken with his writing about his experience. He was
Mhm.
a young medical student in Holland, where he was born, and he joined the resistance for a short time and was betrayed and sent to Auschwitz, where he survived for about 2 years, and then to Dachau. He survived that too, escaping at the end of the war. He came to the United States and became a psychiatrist. And I didn't know him until much later. But I imagine in my fictional part of my book that I had therapy with him. That's invented. But in my retelling of his own story in the camps, I don't invent anything. I'm trying to be as faithful as I can. And the other real life event was something I intersected with as a 4-year-old. I lived in a small town in Wisconsin in 1950, where there was a simulated communist takeover of the town,
Wow.
staged by the American Legion, the local American Legion, with the help of some conservative lawyers and businessmen. And they enlisted the help of 2 former communists who had turned zealously anti-communist. This gave the veneer of reality to the whole thing. It was meant as a sort of cautionary, what if we get invaded? You have to remember that this was just after the Russians had tested their atom bomb, and China had just succeeded in their revolution. So people were certainly justifiably concerned, but it went over sort of overboard in a way. My parents then, they lived there, of course, were kind of put off by the whole thing. I remember very little of it, but it became part of the family lore, and I did a fair amount of research into it. It was well documented because the planners invited Life magazine and the New York Times and Chicago papers and many other newsreel organizations, and you can find this online now. You can find the story of this pageant, they called it. It was interesting. They herded the townspeople, a very small town. They herded the townspeople down to the main square, served them borscht and black bread, and harangued them with communist lectures. And there were marches loyal to Stalin, people holding banners swearing allegiance to Stalin, who was still alive at the time.
Wow.
And those who resisted, either honestly or just pretend, were incarcerated in the makeshift gulags in the middle of town. It was a real sort of make-believe invasion. And then it was over after a few days. But my parents were kind of outraged by the whole thing, by the way it stuffed down their throats. And so we talked about it a lot as I grew older, and I did some research into that too. That became part of the book.
Yeah, amazing. All these different stories coming together. I think the real stories make the fictional stories feel even more real. And of course, they are real in part. I mean, it's just a wonderful medley, if you will, of fiction and nonfiction. Tell us a little bit about this kidnapping in your book. I alluded to it earlier.
Right. This is the kind of thing which one might think is current events or so on, but it's happening all the time, kidnappings in certain countries. Imagine my character kidnapped for his liberal views by a kind of a zealous organization of, I would call them terrorists, but they're made up of all different fundamental religions. They're Jewish terrorists and Arab terrorists and Christian zealots and so on. This is, of course, an impossible organization in a certain sense. But I think it's a metaphor for how dogma and zealotry is dangerous. And because they know of me as a writer of humanism and liberal instincts, they kidnap me. They first try to get some ransom out of my family, and my family can't afford it. So they threaten to put me to death, and I'll leave it at that, whether they do or not. That forms the epilogue of the book. So on.
Amazing. Was that inspired at all by real life events, or simply the polarization of society today?
Yes, I think more that. I think I see polarization as kind of ideologues versus reasonable people who want to get along with others.
Yeah, we live in a crazy world. I mean, people used to have differing viewpoints. They didn't want to kill each other.
Right.
That's the difference. And it's interesting that you got extreme Jewish people, extreme Christians, and extreme Muslims together in an alliance in this kidnapping plot because, like you said, a zealot's a zealot. If you're believing something to the point that you would kidnap somebody, you're all drinking the same Kool-Aid,
Right.
whether you hate each other or not, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. It seems unlikely on the one hand. On the other hand, I think terrorists understand each other and they often collude, in various ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you envisioned this as a TV series or a book or anything? I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of The Man in the High Castle when you've got the Wisconsin simulation of a communist invasion. What
Right.
are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I saw The Man in the High Castle, the film version. I haven't read the book, but it's
Mm,
frightening. It's frightening.
yeah.
And I think that's what it was meant to be by Philip K. Dick. He was meant to write a scary story about what might happen.
Right.
And he thought it out very intricately. It's quite amazing the detail he went into. Um, in a way that sort of detail was part of the planning of this simulated communist takeover, especially by these two former communists.
Mm,
And their stories are important to my book too. Originally, I had their real life stories as part of the novel.
mhm,
And my wife, who read the book, said it breaks the rhythm of the novel. You
mm,
should put that at the end if you have it at all. So their stories form the kind of an appendix. But I
mm,
feel they're very interesting how uh, uh, somebody who feels so strongly about something and then is betrayed
mm,
by the people he thought he was supporting,
yeah.
they they go way over to the other side and become
Yeah.
so zealously, anti whatever they were before. And that's what happened to them, and they were very fluent in communist ideology, and so they were very good at kind of creating this effect in the small town
Mm,
simulation.
yeah. Amazing. And I do think it would be a terrific film or series because I do think you have these interesting storylines that uh, intertwine that would just make for compelling viewing, because you're not staying stationary on one story for too long. You're interweaving them. And I think
Well,
that'd be great as well.
I'd be thrilled, but I don't
Yeah.
expect that somehow.
Yeah, we never expect it, but you put the work out there and you never know. I mean, that's the thing about Hollywood. That's the thing about show business. It's like a message in a bottle, that you never know where it's going to wind up, who's going to read it. The name of the book is Orpheus in Jerusalem. It's written by Daniel Stepner. It is a captivating novel that interweaves four narratives, blending fiction and real life events, framed by a gripping kidnapping story. It's a terrific read. It's a provocative read, and you'll just love it. Daniel, do you have any books coming up? Any other books?
The only thing I can imagine possibly publishing is a sort of collection of program notes that I've written over the years about music I've played. I'm a classical violinist, and I'm very into classical music. I can't imagine writing another novel like this. Maybe a
Right.
short story or something, but I'm not working at that right now. I am working at program notes and editing those and so on. I find there's a number of people. There are a number of people who really want to read about classical music
Yeah.
and get to understand it better. And that's my intent, to try to reach those people who don't know a lot about classical music but want to listen more to it. So that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm
That
doing right now.
sounds great. Sounds like a good plan, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, thank you. I'm sorry I mixed up your first and last names.
I have two last names. That's why it's easy to do. When you're Logan Crawford, there's another actor out there named Crawford Logan, and our
Really,
credits actually get messed up on IDMB. So
really.
you're not the first, you won't be the last. And like I said, whatever you call me, I've been called worse. So
Okay,
thanks so
Logan.
much.
Thank you very much, Logan.
I
I appreciate it.
appreciate it, Daniel. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.